So as I mentioned, our HiSam theme this year is Mythbusters, but today we're not so much busting myths, but we're exploring kind of a mystery. I admit that despite being in and around natural resources for more than 15 years now here in Hawaii, I knew of the existence of the Animal Industry Division at HUA, but I actually had very little understanding of the functions. And just recently, I had the opportunity to connect with one of our guests here today about rabbits. And she told us about rabbit hemorrhagic disease, which I had never heard of. And learning about that was equal parts horrifying and fascinating. But it's a really important disease that I was not familiar with, and I certainly did not know was already present here in Hawaii. As invasive species professionals, Chelsea and I, we are regularly exposed and discussing and wondering and thinking about threats from invasive plant species and certainly some animal species. But this is really a different type of invasive species, and it requires a really different skill set and knowledge base. Animal-borne diseases, these diseases threaten the health of our pets, our cattle industry, our animal industries, our wildlife, and even potentially our human health. So we thought this would just be a great opportunity for us to learn more and to share that time with you. So to introduce our two guests today, we have Dr. Kim Kozuma. She is the Deputy State Veterinarian with Hawaii Department of Agriculture Animal Industry Division. She was actually born and raised right here in Hawaii, and she got her undergrad in biology at UH Hilo. So my alma mater too, yay, go Vulcans. She went on to get her doctorate in veterinary medicine from Mississippi State, after which she practiced in private practice in South Georgia, doing everything from large animals to small animals exclusively. In 2001, she was deployed to the UK for the Foot and Mouth Task Force, and in 2003, the Newcastle's Disease Task Force. So she's really been on the front lines with these animal diseases. Lucky for us, she returned to Hawaii in 2007, and she worked at 2 small animal practices and taught at the UH Hilo College of Ag, Forestry, and Natural Resources Management for a while before she joined the Hawaii Department of Agriculture Animal Disease Control Branch for Hawaii Island, where she's been for the last 15 years. She's also one of our state's foreign animal disease diagnosticians. Sorry, I know you guys saw the poll thing there. It jumped up at me too. And she attends trainings at the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, which is a federal biosafety level 3 laboratory and the nation's premier defense against introduction of transboundary animal diseases. She's also trained at the USDA National Veterinary Service Laboratories in Ames, Iowa. So again, right on the front lines of preparedness in recognizing and responding to animal disease threats. We are so excited to welcome you here. Dr. Kim Kozuma. Next, we have Dr. Raquel Wong, who also got her undergrad here in Hawaii from UH Manoa in animal science, and also went to earn her doctor in veterinary medicine degree from Colorado State University. Like Kim, Raquel joined HUA Animal Industry Division Rabies Quarantine Branch after spending some time in private practice. She has spent over 20 years with this agency, working in a variety of positions, improving skills in diagnostic veterinary medicine, as well as administration and management. Currently, she's with the veterinary laboratory, but she wears a lot of varied hats over there, as she also plays a key role in supporting all the branches throughout the division to fill any gaps that might arise in daily operations. And we all know as state employees that there are always gaps that have to be filled. So big job over there. And Dr. Raquel Wong is going to be our first presenter today. So after that, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I know you're going to be sharing your screen. So whenever you're ready.
All right. Well, hello and good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for this opportunity for letting us share a little bit about our agency. And I'm going to share my screen now. So if you could bear with me for just a second.
Okay, looks like something's coming through. There we go.
Okay, there we go. Okay.
There you go.
Now I have the right screen. Okay, so where we're going to start is so my part is going to be more about some of the background and some of what we do and how we relate to the rest of the state government agencies. And then Kim is going to be going into much more of the interesting stuff, which is in the field sort of functions that we do. So this is just a very brief summary of how we approach are different functional areas. And as it was mentioned earlier, it very much plays towards the interplay between the animal health, the human health, and the environment. And there is a concept amongst the agencies called One Health. And that basically is looking at how those things function together and interact with each other, because we well know that, you know, when we have to deal or respond to that something in one arena, even if it's like strictly in animal health, it probably does have repercussions in those other two areas. So we're going to kind of start with how the Department of Agriculture is set up. And this just to give a somewhat of an overview of how animal industry and our counterparts in plant industry connect with each other. We do actually work very closely with our counterparts in plant industry, and the primary area, or what this slide is going to demonstrate basically, is the different branches that are associated with these two divisions. Animal industry does have 4 branches within it. There's the animal disease control branch, which focuses primarily on livestock and poultry industry. The rabies quarantine branch, which focuses on the movement of dogs and cats into the state. The veterinary laboratory is a diagnostic services branch, and that laboratory supports the other 2 branches. And then we do have the aquaculture and livestock support services, and that one is more in market development and commodity. And I believe in the next series of slides, we'll break it down a little bit more. But first, as far as plant industry versus animal industry, the best way that I like to think about that interaction is the plant quarantine branch maintains these lists. And these lists have been around for many decades. And what it is they are the gatekeepers. So they are the branch that helps to determine, you know, what species are allowed into the state. And when they are allowed into the state, does it require a permit? Are there additional safeguards that commodity has to go through in order to enter into a state? And so these pictures here are just some idea of the types of animals that are coming into our state, and some of them are prohibited, and then some of them are conditionally approved. You know, things that you would see in a pet store or something like that, or our regular domestic species. So this is how the 4 branches within animal industry interact with each other. And again, as you can see, disease response, that is one of our primary functional areas. Disease or animal movement, that is a second primary functional area. And then finally, our commodity support services. So we're going to just go very quickly through commodity support. They primarily operate to provide solutions for producers. They work at that interface between the buyers and the producers, and they help to find solutions to help producers become more efficient in their production systems, either through use of technology or through increasing the genetics within the production unit, or the types of things of that nature. In addition, they go in the other direction as far as market development to make sure that that product has a market that it will accept and in the volume that needs to occur. Okay. So the first big primary function that we have is animal movement. So we're talking about the importation only, really, of the livestock species and poultry industry and the companion animals. We work very, very closely with our federal partners in the USDA. There are 2 main areas in the USDA that we work closely with. First, veterinary services, which is basically like their field section, and then the import-export services. And this is movement of animal commodities both into and out of the United States. So when an animal moves either into the US, primarily into the US, they have to first get okay from the federal government before they then can enter into our state. And here's just a snapshot of the number of animal imports that we are inspecting. And just keep in mind, there are eyes that are laid on each of these animals. So the largest segment, of course, is going to be poultry, because we do import day-old chicks for the hatchery industry. And then the other big segment of time is taken up by the dogs and cats. So we are seeing upwards of 20,000 of dogs and cats coming into our state in any given year. And it does fluctuate. But I also wanted to note that even during the pandemic, when the travel had slowed down, we still actually saw quite a normal level of imports that were occurring during that time, surprisingly. One of the primary reasons, and I know Dr. Kozuma will talk probably a little bit more about this, that we have this inspection process and we have a series of safeguards for animals to meet prior to entering our state is the tick. So Hawaii has been blessed with we only basically have 2 tick species in our state. We have the brown dog tick, which is statewide, and then we have a livestock finest ear tick, where we just occasionally get reports about. Once in a while, this is primarily livestock. But the other types of ticks that you see here, such as the deer tick, which is very famous for being an efficient transmission point for Lyme disease, those types of ticks you do not see here in the state. And again, there are safeguards for animals that enter into our state, both before they come in, as well as after they arrive, to ensure that carriers of ticks, which are most commonly things like horses and dogs, they seem to be the ones that we catch the most. They are treated prior to entry, and then also once they are here, or they have a long-acting treatment that will prevent the entry of these types of ticks. As the climate is changing and it is becoming, next slide. As the climate is changing and things are becoming a little bit warmer, we're seeing these ticks move across the country and going northward and westward as a result of it being warmer across the continental US. The next component of movement is making sure that these animals have unique identification. For livestock, it's usually this ear tag. And so each of these tags have a unique number associated with that animal. It allows us to do disease traceback. And where that's important is once the animals enter, sometimes there are certain diseases that will not show up until several months or even years after the animal has been imported. And because it has a unique identifier associated with that animal, it makes it a lot more efficient for us to be able to know trace that animal's journey back to the state of import and know who it got mixed with, where it may have gone within the state, and make appropriate action to see if we can judge what the extent of that outbreak is. And this kind of just highlights what I talked a little bit about safeguards. So each of the species that we do regulate do have some type of isolation period once they do arrive into the state, whether it's an on-farm isolation that is good for the producers themselves, the owners of livestock, because they do not want to mix new imported animals with their resident animals. And that is a hallmark of biosecurity. Just make sure you're not introducing disease into your resident animals. For the dogs and cats, there is a direct airport release. The safeguards that are present for that pre-arrival period are much more intense than we do for some of the livestock. And when they don't meet those pre-arrival criteria, they are held at our animal quarantine station until such time as they do. Okay. So this is just to kind of give a highlight of some of the biosecurity tasks and just re-emphasize the things that we have talked a little bit about earlier. So again, safeguards before the animal even enters, testing that will vary by species. And the involvement of the testing will vary by species. Making sure that they each have some type of unique identifier that, again, if disease can manifest itself once the animal does arrive, you can trace that back to its point of origin, as well as, and even if it comes from outside the state, that state may be interested in knowing when you recognize disease of high consequence, because it could also be affecting their state as well. And then that, of course, kind of relates to together, because then it becomes a national problem and USDA will get involved at that point. Pre-arrival health check. So that is the inspection that usually a veterinarian will do prior to the animal's entry into our state. So that's like a health certificate, that's most commonly what it's referred to, or certificate of veterinary inspection. A animal official will actually, examine the animal, make sure it's healthy, it's clinically not showing any signs of infectious or contagious disease. Once the animal has arrived into our state, the staff will review the documentation, make sure it's meets the import requirements in terms of statements that should be on the certificate of veterinary inspection, or any additional documentation that's necessary. It matches the information there. It says it's a brown cow, and on the paperwork says it's a brown cow. They also will go ahead and inspect the animals physically, and that is laying eyes on them, looking for any signs of clinical or contagious disease, as well as for exotic ticks. And should that be recognized, whatever actions need to be taken will be taken, and that can run the gamut. Everything from spot treating, for example, if you find ticks, or actually refusing the shipment and having those animals returned to their point of origin. And then, as I mentioned earlier, once they are in the state, there is isolation procedures for especially livestock who are going to be going to their farm, mainly to make sure that once they are there and they're not as stressed, sometimes that's one of these CDDs that will manifest itself. And it is important for producers to remember that that's really safe to their resident animals, so they are not going to infect their resident animals. And they can also take appropriate action if they see disease by contacting our office. Some species also require post-arrival testing, and that's because we do know that there is a long lifetime between when an animal may get exposed to certain diseases and when it may actually manifest the disease. And so post-arrival testing usually occurs about a month, anywhere from 1 month to 45 days after the animal was. And again, we work very closely with our partners in USDA. They help to, give guidance as far as what are critical diseases of concern, and then how that sort of is circulating within the larger globe, so that potentially, if we recognize those types of symptoms, we would alert them and they can take appropriate action as well. Okay. The second thing, or the other functional area that we spend a lot of time on, is going to be disease response. So to make sense. So a lot of our time is spent in monitoring or watching for emerging threats. And this is just some of the threats that we are currently looking for on a day-to-day basis. And again, it goes hand in hand with that inspection process and those pre-arrival processes before the animals come in, where the situation basically is animals will sort of manifest disease in very limited ways, and where the veterinarian part of it comes involved is that being able to distinguish where something that's sort of detrimental to the animal, but is something that is detrimental and has high consequence. So the inspection process is important for sort of going between that, and then the follow-up with that with the disease response and investigation is also important for making sure we make that distinction. So again, just a couple of things. Avian influenza, which everyone's talking about, the high prices of eggs due to a bird flu. So this threat has been going on since 2018, actually, and it's sort of, the producers on the mainland have gotten better at recognizing the clinical signs associated with the disease and taking faster action to stamp out. It is a disease that's foreign to the United States, meaning that we do not have it in our domestic flock. So they do stamp out anytime there is a threat to that disease. Unfortunately, it does lead to depopulation. The challenge with avian influenza is that it is endemic. It occurs naturally in wild bird species, especially migrating birds. So it can be difficult to prevent it from coming into a premises. For Hawaii, we are very, again, it's blessed because two things. Number one, we're far, far away and we don't see a large number of migratory birds, especially waterfowl that come into our state. And then second is that it is a cold weather virus that likes sustained temperatures below 70 degrees. So that's why we tend to hear about it during the winter months more so than in the summer months. The other one that we are watching closely is chicken swine fever. This is a disease swine only. It does not affect any other species. It was first detected in China, again around that 2018 period, and it is in Asia. And unfortunately, I might have a slide later, but it's a very efficient virus. So it moves very well on different methods. And one area that it moves on is the meat products. And because Hawaii has such a close relationship to China, or I'm sorry, to Asia, then those meat products potentially could be a problem if you have swine producers who do food slop or garbage. Even though it's cooked, potentially there's still an avenue for which that virus could enter into our local population. However, the Customs and Border Protection, they do an excellent job of detecting and preventing the entry of all foreign meat products, and they basically prohibit the entry of those types of fish. And then finally, as I mentioned before, the ticks. So ticks, as climate is changing and ticks are moving westward and northward, they are becoming more likely to catch a rise on something that could come into our state. Okay, so they always ask us, well, what do you need? How can your job be better done? And really, it comes down to things that a lot of programs need, or a lot of agencies need, and that's basically having the facilities to ensure that both the animals are safe as well as the humans that have to inspect them. So safe, secure facilities, having that capability of being able to isolate those animals where we can take the time that's needed to assess and test and make sure we have a good idea of what we're dealing with and what potentially the impact is going to be. Field personnel. In addition to veterinary professionals, we have a group of livestock inspectors who are key, and veterinary technicians who are key in helping us recognize what is normal and what is abnormal, and then highlighting these things so that the veterinarians can then pull those out and take a closer look at what the situation is. And then access to resources. So even, in addition to the inspection process, the disease response portion of it actually takes a lot of resources because we're dealing with generally livestock. And these are large animals. So there's a lot of manpower that's involved, and just having equipment to be able to maneuver safely around the situation. So having that access to resources would be very helpful for the program. So just to highlight some of the different aspects of all that we do here, again, we cover all the domestic species for the imports and the disease response. And every day, it's an interesting situation as far as not quite sure what we're going to see next, but it's just knowing that we have a great team that will respond when those things come up. And that concludes my portion of the discussion.
Okay. I'm Dr. Kim Kozuma. Most people just refer to me as Dr. Kim. And I primarily am in charge of taking care of whatever happens on the Big Island, because we have been short-staffed for such a time period. I'm usually the one that winds up going to Kauai or helping out on Maui County or even Oahu sometimes. So we do kind of spread out like peanut butter and just real thin, and we kind of fill in gaps as we need. Fortunately, we just have 2 new hires. We now have a new veterinary medical officer for Maui County, and that's going to be a huge help between Dr. Aurora Villarreal and the USDA VMOs that have now also been hired. It's easing the workload for us in dealing with Molokai and their TB situation. So, okay, next slide. Okay, so what do I do on a typical day? I'm out in the field, so I probably have the most interaction with producers. And I wear many hats when I go out there. So one of the things we focus on will be programmed diseases like tuberculosis, swine brucellosis, pseudorabies, uh, trichomoniasis. It's trichomoniasis or trick in cattle. Uh, I also am the last line of defense for imports. I usually meet the plane every other week and inspect all the livestock coming off the plane at Pacific Airlift out in Kona. I'll also meet the cruise ships or if a sailboat should pop up. And I've taken a dinghy out to Radio Bay when it was a little bit rough and was hoping that my microchip scanner didn't go swimming because I came close to it. We also participate in disease investigations. Our producers are out in the front lines and they're the first ones to say, hey, I'm not used to seeing this much death or disease or illness, or I'm seeing something strange. And I heard my friend down the road might be having the same issues. Because of our working relationships with the producers in all the different areas. I mean, I've had the fortune to be here for 15 years, so I'm very familiar with a lot of the people in the industries and develop that trust. And they'll let us know, hey, something's not quite right. Can you check it out? And so we'll be able to assist them, especially knowing that our veterinarians on island, especially those that will deal with livestock, are very limited. There is a distinct line. We don't practice veterinary medicine, but we certainly are there to assist. We also participate in disaster response and training, and that's something I'll get into in a little bit. And I do quite a bit of public outreach with producers organizations, 4-H, FFA, groups like BISC. Anyway, so we get involved in many different ways in the community. And the biggest thing is having those working relationships with not only within our department, but with other departments as well as the public. And knowing your backyard is so important, especially if a disease, a foreign animal disease comes into the state. Just from having eyes on the ground, boots on the ground, we kind of know where we're going to have to kind of focus our resources. And by having that relationship, hopefully it's not as traumatic where you have some stranger in a white Tyvek going, hi, I'm from the government, I'm here to help you. That can be kind of scary. So we're very available, easy to reach. And that's part of the best part of my job is it's different every day. And I'm out in the field working with producers. Okay, next slide. So when it comes to program diseases, I mentioned them. These are usually diseases that we manage with a cooperative agreement with USDA. USDA kind of lets us know these are the diseases nationally that we're concerned about, and every state has a cooperative agreement for each of those diseases to help them address it. We do swine testing for pseudorabies and brucellosis. We do see that, and occasionally it does spill over into our domestic pigs. All our pigs here in Hawaii are infected, the wild pigs. There's a high percentage that carries both pseudorabies and or brucellosis. And whenever we have a break in disease in the domestics, there's almost always been a feral pig in the background. So we try and mitigate that interaction between the wild pigs and domestic pigs. Here you can see a water buffalo. Yes, I have to TB test on that. And there's a TB test chart right off to the side. It's interesting. It's not limited to your traditional livestock species. So it was interesting going out to test this water buffalo. Fortunately, when I was in Georgia, I've had some experience testing bison as well. And let me tell you, you need special handling equipment. Cattle equipment won't cut it. Down towards the bottom, there's some rectal tissue. We do live animal biopsies for our small ruminants, sheep and goats, to check for scrapie. We have set minimums that we need to send samples in for USDA. It's very difficult to get goat samples here in Hawaii. So we wind up doing a lot of live animal testing. And right where you see those little dots on the bottom, that's where we do a little nip and tuck and take some tissue from there. Fortunately, Mother Nature didn't expect to have scissors in that area, so they do not have the nerves to feel cutting. And if anything, the goats just don't like being restrained more than anything else. And then at the slaughterhouses, we do collect brain and OBEC samples. And scrapie is in the same family of diseases that causes mad cow in cattle. So that's why we monitor that. And then, of course, this is not a van, this is the airplane. And it's been interesting flying back and forth on Mokulele. Great views. It just tells you, it's kind of tough to get out to Molokai sometimes, and sometimes it's tough to come back. So you kind of have to wing it as you go. So that was very interesting. If anybody's not flown Mokulele, they should try it. Unless they don't like flying, then don't. It's a close-up view. Okay, for imports, again, we talked a little bit about facilities and such, and this is one area that's really kind of sketch and lacking and kind of keeps me up at night. You can see this is my inspection area. It's the middle of a gravel parking lot. And here you could see a horse that came off the plane that has some ulcers on its nose. There are certain diseases that pop up during on the mainland that we need to be aware of. And so when I see this, then I go ahead and run what's called a foreign animal disease investigation. So in this case, we're looking for something called VS, or vesicular stomatitis. Reality, though, this horse just kind of rubbed his nose on some of the equipment that I think the cargo net. He was rubbing his nose on the cargo net or chewing on it on the plane when he flew in. But nonetheless, you don't assume, and we ran it and it came back negative. But this horse, of course, was obviously quarantined, as well as the rest of the animals on the flight. You can see it. Some turtles showed up at UPS unexpectedly, so I went out to inspect them. Fortunately, they were okay. There were no ticks, and they all survived transport fairly well. And if you look to the far right, this is a special breed of pig that somebody took 5 years trying to bring in, and those are Mangalitsa pigs. They actually have a wool fleece, and those are the breed of pigs that make those very expensive Italian hams that take like 10 years to cure, and also can keep foot and mouth and African swine fever alive for that length of time in those sausages and hams. So that's something that we are very aware of. And that's why we have restrictions on meat imports coming in from other countries that have those diseases. So this individual here decided that she was going to bring in stock from the mainland and start that kind of an operation here. And it was pretty interesting seeing these hairy pigs. And then, of course, we have cattle. So obviously at the airport, there's no facilities. I'll have to follow the trailer to usually the producer's facilities and then do my inspection there. So that kind of prolongs the inspection time, but it allows us to still get it done. Okay, next page. And here we are. Again, we open up the mouth, make sure there's no ulcers going on here. I think this was the horse that, yeah, you could see there's some abrasions a little bit up on the lip there. That's that same horse that had the ulcers on the nose. Again, sometimes we have to do necropsies, kind of like forensics or CSI, and we're able to get samples, and we're supported by our lab as well as our national lab. And so a lot of times we'll wind up splitting samples, and we get the ball rolling here in Hawaii. One of the challenging things is if we run across something that looks like a foreign animal disease, we're all the way in Hawaii. And usually that happens on a holiday weekend. And in worst case scenarios, we need to get samples out to Plum Island, all the way out off of Long Island, New York, in less than 48 hours. You're really supposed to have it there in less than 24. Fortunately, that doesn't happen very often, but we do have a courier service if need be to get samples all the way out there. And then the animals up at the top in the muddy area, that's a disease investigation. Excuse me, sorry about that. Let me stop. Okay, sorry about that. So in this particular case, somebody was feeding slop and not cooking it and just throwing it on the ground. And you could see all the animals that were exposed to that. And that's a huge issue. And that just shows how infected material, say from the slaughterhouse, that maybe a pig had brucellosis or pseudorabies because they do slaughter feral hogs. Somebody picks it up, throws it out for composting on their property, and they don't isolate the animals. And all these animals now are potentially exposed to those diseases. So we try and nip that in the bud when we find out about it. And then again, down at the very bottom, you can see that we're trained in picking up the right samples and getting them shipped off in a timely manner to help out, especially for a rapid disease diagnosis. We also work with our state Department of Health. They are what's called an all-in lab, and they're able to do some work for us as well, especially with avian influenza. And they can also do foot and mouth testing as well too. So we have that in place for rapid diagnosis if need be. Okay, next slide. Disaster response. Here's the big one. Both lava eruptions, Dr. Moniz and I, that's it. It was just us two, realized where this flow was coming. And I live in the Puna district. And I realized this area that's cleared down there is a lot of small farm holders that don't have a lot of trailers. They don't have a way to evacuate their animals. And this lava flow was coming down. And so we set up to help with evacuations and trying to get these animals out to safety. We did have some quarantines in place for different diseases on island. So we processed those animals at our quarantine facility at Paneva, and then we sent them on to safer pastures. And then the one house that burned down, there's video of that. That was actually my friend's house, and it was a 4-H family. So we were able to get their livestock out, and they're currently living in Kalapana now. And then this is the second lava flow, and that happened much more quickly and involved much more agencies. We had ASPCA. If you look at the little kipukas there, we actually had animals trapped. And so it was kind of all hands on deck. And we had to handle that evacuation a little bit differently. We have wildfires here. Last year, I think Parker Ranch burned about 40,000 acres. And fortunately, they lost very, very few animals. And the cowboys were out there getting those animals out of the way, cutting fence, bulldozing. So hurricane response, tsunamis, we're part of the emergency response system as well, too. Next slide. And of course, public outreach. So again, we participate with 4-H. We go ahead and speak to the different clubs. We talk to them about what we do, and then we volunteer and help make sure that the animals all have their ID tags in that need it. And we work with CTAR and Extension to make sure that they're also in compliance with any animal movements that go on. Next slide. And that's it. That's the end. So I know that was really quick and dirty, but if anybody has any questions, again, go for it.
That was so great. Thank you so much. I feel like every time I talk to you folks, I personally learned so much new stuff. So I really appreciate you both being here today. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see. Oh, I can't do it. Can you stop sharing the screen or?
Oh, sure. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Just so people will be able to see your faces so we can ask questions. So go ahead and you can put your questions in the Q&A box, or if you want to use the chat, that's fine as well. But one of the first questions that we have, somebody was asking, why is there no quarantine period for sheep or goats? Somebody want to take that?
You want to handle that, Kim, or you want me to take it?
Oh, well, I guess since you do a lot of the administration stuff, I mean, I'm a sheep and goat person, but you kind of do the legal legislation,
policy,
administrative stuff. So we can both answer it, but if you want to go first.
So at least from a administrative level or from a policy level, it just hasn't been something that the division has focused on. I think primarily just because sheep and goats don't carry some of the significant diseases that we care about in the other ruminant species like cattle. So that's probably why the rules are written like that. I will say that we are in the process of updating that chapter as we speak. So I think that there will be some additional safeguards that are going to get added in the sheep and goat sector.
And yeah, and basically they don't carry a lot of the diseases that we see. And when we're regulating for diseases of high economic importance that would wipe out an industry. So a sheep that comes in with a cold, the producers they also have to bear some role in biosecurity as well. So when the animals come on in, what I usually do is I'll tell them, keep an eye on them, keep them separate from your flock, see how they adjust. If any of them get sick, let us know, and then you can introduce them to your flock. There are diseases that aren't called program diseases, but that owners might want to test for. For sheep and goats, you can think of diseases like CL or cheesy gland. OPP and CAE, it's a virus that causes arthritis and progressive pneumonia over time. Most sheep and goat owners are aware of that. And as part of a pre-purchase exam, you can always ask the person that you're buying from to either have them tested, or you can have them and then test them on your own, or you can ask what their herd or flock status is, or what are they doing. But those diseases are not being managed at a national level. So it's more at a producer level.
That's so interesting. We do a lot of work with trying to help people prevent the spread of pests like little fire ants, in some places koki, slugs, things like that. And it's really funny to hear you make recommendations that we also make for personal biosecurity, right? We talk about biosecurity for the whole island, but you guys are sort of saying the same thing we say about if, you're getting plants, if you're getting potted plants or you're getting some new cuttings, quarantine that for a little bit from the rest of your garden and the rest of your yard. Make sure, test it, make sure that you don't have fire ants, that there aren't things in there that you don't want. It's really funny just to see how these practices are kind of universal for everything that you're trying to keep from coming in. And it sounds like that would be something. I did used to have goats and I didn't do any of those things.
Well,
so
that's the other point too, is that not everybody manages their flocks the same way. There are people that buy and sell from everywhere, or they'll grab something off the mountain. They don't have a herd health plan. And so we have to balance the economic reality and hardships of putting those testing regulations and quarantines on the importers or exporters against what most people do as well too. And so unless industry says we don't want to have these diseases, which are already here, ORF is one of them. It causes a scabby mouth. I'd say national studies say that about 40 to 50% of the sheep and goat flocks in the United States are positive for ORF. Does it cause a huge problem? If it's the first time your flock's getting it, yeah. If not, it occasionally pops up. Does it do a lot of damage? Usually not. So again, we have to weigh the economic impact of our recommendations and burdens, and is it going to really make a difference? So yeah, I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but again, you're trying to regulate for the masses. I raise sheep, and as far as when I bring in animals, because I'm sinking so much into the genetics in my program, I make sure those animals are quarantined and tested. I have a closed herd. Nobody comes into my farm unless I do a biosecurity screen on them. But then again, I'm probably the top 5% of producers that actually do that. But should the state impose my health requirements to everybody else? Not necessarily in that situation.
Yeah, I think that is really important, weighing those things. Were you going to add something, Dr. Wu?
I just wanted to add to, along those lines, some of the, well, at least for our duties and functions, we're talking at an industry level, but the thing I realized I forgot to mention is that we actually also work very closely with the private practitioners, the veterinarians. They are also our boots on the ground for helping us recognize when there is significant disease out there, and they'll give us a call and ask questions about what they should do in certain situations, or if it does require intervention. So we rely very heavily and speak to them pretty often with regards to some of these updates or disease updates that occur.
Wow, it's great to know we have that network. Somebody had asked, and this is something that kind of, sparked this whole discussion or this thought that we should have this, because this is something I found really interesting. Someone's asking about rabbit hemorrhagic disease on Maui, which, that was something that we had talked about, Kim. And, one of the reasons we came to that is because as the Big Island Invasive Species Committee, we're seeing a lot of reports of people letting their rabbits on the ground, which we know is against the law. For the protection of Hawaii's environment, we don't want to have rabbits loose because they're very destructive. You can look at Australia, look what happened with rabbits. But, in our discussions with you, we found out it's, beyond the idea of protecting the Hawaii environment, protecting the rabbit, keeping the rabbit off the ground. Can you go into a little bit more about that?
Yeah, rabbit hemorrhagic disease is highly infectious and pretty lethal to hares and rabbits, and that's it. So it's just within those species. So we can't get it, but we can walk around and spread it. And this virus is very hardy. It can live out in the environment, on dust, on cages, in biofilm for over a year. And so the thing that's frustrating is in the United States, it seems to be popping up here and there. Well, where's it coming from? I mean, we're in the middle of the Pacific. These rabbits were here. They didn't travel. Owners didn't travel. How did it get here? And so the part that's really kind of scary is viruses are a lot harder to keep out of the state than, say, bacteria. And when you go and look at where our foods are being sourced, food sources, we import a lot of stuff from China and other places, and it is possible for those viruses to survive the milling process, be contaminated, and survive being on a boat for a week or two or a month, and then be fed to an animal. And then they just, out of the blue, it like drops out of the sky. So those are things that are really kind of scary. There's a lot of research being done, especially for swine. If we ever get African swine fever here, it's like Ebola for pigs. And with the amount of feral pigs in the United States and Hawaii, when we get it, we'll never get rid of it. So we're going to have to manage it. And in China, they've lost over half of their swine supply. They've lost hundreds of millions of pigs. If not, has it gone up to the billion of dead pigs?
I think so. No.
But it's pretty high, to the point where they are now moving towards raising pigs indoors completely in like condominiums. And they have HEPA filters, and they restrict people movement. The people have to stay on campus. They eat, they drink, they stay on this premise, not allowed to go to any other pig premise. And they have to shower in. The feed trucks are not allowed to come in, or they'll make their own feed on site. And they're doing that to be contained because China is one of the largest pork producers in the world, and they've lost so much. The demand is just through the roof. And so they're doing that to protect their pigs because it's out there. They're never going to be able to get rid of it. So now they have to kind of raise their pigs in a bubble to keep them safe.
Wow. Yeah, that's very frightening. Woo. And knowing that like some of these things are already here, not, the swine flu, but certainly like rabbit hemorrhagic disease, knowing that it's already here and, we haven't on this island, I don't think anybody knows that it's already in Maui.
Well, it's burnt out. Fortunately, we've snuffed it out. We cleaned and disinfected, and that involved, unfortunately, it shocked me that people didn't know that it's illegal to have rabbits on the ground. So they had a bunny play yard. It was called Bunnyland or Playland or Bunny Town. I forgot. And so I had to actually rake up all the droppings. And mind you, it's dusty, it's blowing, it's difficult to contain that. And you're going, I hope I'm not spreading it as I'm trying to clean and disinfect this area. And we had to soak it down with disinfectant, Virkon. And the rabbits that were still healthy on that premise were quarantined for at least 4 months on that premise. But fortunately, it seems like we snuffed it out. In Hawaii, yeah, if it gets out into the wild population, I don't know how the state would feel about that because we do not have native species here. that are hares, and the rabbits are a huge problem. And it was actually deliberately introduced in Australia to control them. So again, another reason, keep your rabbits up off the ground. If they are on the ground, make sure they're indoors in your house, but do not get out so they can't dig. Just keep them up off the ground.
Wow. It's funny because there was a question here: can diseases be used as a biocontrol for invasive animals? And it sounds like in some cases they absolutely are. And if do you know of any that are proposed for Hawaii at this point for any invasive animals, any disease biocontrols that are being proposed? I don't know of any.
I don't think that would fly here, because I think it'd be too controversial, because once it's out, it's out. The genie's out of there, and then you worry about unintentional spillover to, someone's 4-H rabbit in a hutch.
Right.
And so once it's out there, it's just like any other biocontrol. You have to study it for a long period of time, look at the feasibility, see any unintended consequences, just like releasing a lot of the biocontrol for fireweed or for strawberry guava.
But in that case, when we're testing for biocontrols for plants, we can sacrifice plants to the testing process. Whereas there would be a lot of, I think you're right, there'd be a lot of ethical concerns with deliberately introducing Hawaiian livestock and animals to things to test. I think that's a whole different level. Very interesting. If there are illegal imports, I'm guessing of animals, illegal pets, something like that, is that more plant quarantine, or is that you guys? If somebody, let's say somebody has an illegal lizard or a snake or illegal mammal, does that fall under you? Do you know what happens with that?
Plant quarantine.
Quarantine. Interesting. Plant quarantine takes care of the illegal animal.
If it's a dog or a cat and we find out about it, usually we'll catch that at the airport through the ag declaration forms. But again, we all know that no border is 100% safe. They are porous. Even though we have inspectors and safeguards in place, if there's enough desire, somebody can bring something in. I know that as far as planes and vessels, the Coast Guard's kind of out there. But again, there is still potential. If somebody were to take a private sailboat to, say, Waipio Valley, and nobody, you're supposed to be out there and be inspected, but if nobody shows up and then you come in, it would have to be deliberate. We have a lot of private planes that fly into the Kona airport and other airports, especially around Ironman. We have a sheikh that flies in all the time from different countries. So, of course, we have plant quarantine staff there to meet them, Customs and Border Patrol. But that's not to say that it's not impossible for somebody to slip through the cracks.
Wow. So let's see. One last question. This person has seen a movement to ban the live import and export of animals because of animal cruelty. Have you seen evidence of that, of animal cruelty with bringing in live animals, like cows, chickens, when they could just, this is kind of funny because it's the same question we have with a lot of our plant issues. Couldn't we just raise stuff here? We already have a lot here. You can raise things here. Why are we bringing them in? And I think, sort of looking at those pictures where you're trying to inspect animals
right
on the Kona airport on the tarmac and the heat and sort of, if just, you can kind of get a sense of like that traveling cannot be easy on these animals.
Right. Well, there's many reasons why. And in my case, I brought in registered Katahdin sheep from South Georgia. Why? Because parasites are a huge problem here in Hawaii. And again, you want your family tree to branch. You take advantage of the genetics from producers that are in an equally tough environment that have been doing it for many generations versus our limited gene pool here. And I wanted to bring in stock that had a good head start to being able to survive in Puna without having to deworm them frequently, because dewormers are losing their effectiveness. So I wanted to bring in the genetics. Another reason is people are moving here. I brought my guardian dogs over from the mainland. Again, it's rare to find guardian dogs here. I'm kind of tired of other people's dogs and pigs killing my livestock. So there aren't very many Kangals in the state, so I brought them in. Reason for animals going out would be it's more economically feasible to take the wean-offs to the mainland to be grown out where the feed is cheaper than it is to keep them here. So there's a lot of different reasons to move. And I totally understand. And I have brought animals in on the plane. I've inspected animals that have come in on the barge. And I can tell you what, some of those cows, not to diss an airline, but the last time I flew United, when it was flying out of Hilo, I was by the toilet. It was horrid. And I was crammed in there like a sardine for this flight to the mainland. The toilet wasn't even cleaned. And I'm thinking, those cows in these nice little boxes with sawdust that smells so good. The smell of sawdust is wonderful. And they're able to lay down, stand up, turn around, and they're able to take a direct flight from Kona and potentially be out in a feed yard in Texas within 12 hours. They're on the mainland in about 5 or 6 versus, other methods of transport. And when you're spending that much money, it behooves, the producer wants to make sure those animals are taken well care of. And a lot of the ranchers that are the bigger ranchers that ship cattle out, they participate in quality assurance programs, be it through Whole Foods or the different programs that they're in. And they actively have animal welfare certifications. They have follow through, they have inspections, they're audited. So they actually care about their animals. And I was looking at those cows going, I'd rather be a cow flying on Pacific Airlift than that United Airlines in the back seat, where it was kind of gnarly and not even food. So
right,
I understand it, but no, the animals aren't packed in like there. We do care about it. And the industry has done a lot studying animals for any heat stress and other things. Our animals are adapted to that here. But if you're going to send a cow from Wisconsin to we're in the middle of the snow and then bring it to the hot of Hawaii, yeah, there is a little bit more stress on that animal. But working with extension, CTAR, we're all very familiar with Temple Grandin and her great work. And we take it seriously because we care about these animals. And if we don't care about them, let's say we didn't even care about them, it will still hit us in the pocketbook if we don't care about them. And so even if you don't care, you have to care because it's just not right and it's going to cost you in the end. So, but wow. Yeah, I know that these people really do care about their animals.
Yeah, and it sounds like you guys do as well. You do a really amazing job, and we're so grateful that you were both able to give us your time today for this webinar. I feel like we've learned a lot. We should ship ourselves if we're flying United as cattle. So sounds like it'd be more comfortable. So that's a lesson learned. Is there? I don't know if you have ready access. Oh, Chelsea put it up. I think I think she's going to put it up in there. Or if you guys have ready access up. Is there a website where people can get more information, find out more about animal industry, something like that we could share?
So the best place to go would be the department's website. So it's hdoa.hawaii.gov. And then there would be a banner that you can either click on the animal industry division and it's usually on the left-hand side of the website itself.
Oh, there you go. That's the website. Yeah. Thank you.
There you go. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. And with that, we're going to wrap up and thank everyone who attended today for joining us and learning more about animal industry. And we so appreciate you guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for the opportunity. Yes. Great.
Mahalo.